Welcome to the TPRM Exchange Podcast, brought to you by the Third Party Risk Association, a not-for-profit, practitioner-led, and framework-agnostic professional organization for third-party risk management professionals.
Welcome to the TPRM Exchange Podcast. In third-party risk management, the biggest incidents we face are not your internal system failures. They're coming from a partner, a supplier, or a vendor you rely on, and suddenly your business is reacting to someone else's problem. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about incident response in the third-party risk management space, and specifically what it takes to coordinate that response beyond your own organization. Because when something goes wrong with a vendor, the accountability still sits with you. I'm your host, Hilary Jewhurst, and I'm happy to welcome our guest today, Sagar Behere. He is the head of third-party risk at Circle Internet Financial. And not only does he lead TPRM, but he also has deep experience leading incident response and resilience planning in very complex and outsourced environments. So thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Hilary. Super excited to be here and have a discussion.
So I'm really curious how you got into third-party risk management, what pulled you into this work?
Well, Hilary, like most people in TPRM, I didn't grow up dreaming about vendor risk. My background was actually into data warehousing and financial risk. And I was very comfortable with structured environment. But then I ended up getting an internship during my master's in a TPRM function for a data warehousing role. So what started as a very technical, quickly turned into a more broader ecosystem role around strategy, policy design, vendor assessments, controls, even regulatory alignment. So that's when it really clicked for me. What really pulled me in was that TPRM sits at an intersection of business strategy, technology governance, and real-world decision-making. And honestly, I was probably the only one in my class who enjoyed those ERM classes. While most people were not as excited, I thought they were fascinating, and that curiosity just never left.
Well, that is it. That is a great background story. Definitely, you're right. A lot of us don't, as little kids think, I want to manage risk someday. But hey, we like to start off with an icebreaker question. So your question is, what is the most innocent thing a vendor can say that is immediately going to set off your red flags?
Oh, that's very good. That one's usually easy. It's when I hear, we don't believe customer data was impacted, but we are still investigating.
Okay. So your red flags are, what are you actually thinking when you hear that?
So when I hear that, that has set off so many meetings in my career than an actual malware incident itself. It usually means one of the three things. They have found something, but they just don't fully understand the scope yet. Or legal is heavily involved. So communication is cautious and carefully worded. And number three is the technical team is still chasing your logs, which they had turned on earlier. And to be clear, I don't mean this cynically, but most vendors aren't hiding things.
Yeah.
They are just experiencing an incident in real time under pressure with incomplete information. The issue is that the customer and regulator don't operate on vendors' learning curve. We have to make decisions even when the picture is still fuzzy.
Right. So that's a really good segue, because what we wanted to start with was how internal incidents are very different than external incidents, right? In terms of detection or escalation. So from your perspective, what makes an internal incident so different than something you're dealing with externally?
Yeah, in a simplest way, internal incidences are about controls and your third-party incidences are about dependencies.
Okay. So
yeah.
Continue. I want to hear more.
Yeah, when something happens internally, basically you own the system, you own the logs, the people and the clock. You can pull data, isolate your systems, and make decisions immediately. But with a third party, that is externally, you respond to someone else's telemetry, someone else's process, and someone else's legal constraint, all while your own business and regulators are asking for answers. hence the dependency.
Right. So you've got all the pressure of forming a response. You've got to gather all the data, and you're completely in someone else's hands when you have to do that. So yeah, that is a pretty big difference. And of course, all during this time, your leadership, if they've been alerted, are going to want answers. They're going to want updates. So, that is one of the biggest pressures I do see during these situations is once from the minute you know something is going on, there's like this anxiety and pressure about keeping leadership updated and what's going on. So in your opinion, before you can actually provide that information, what are the things that you need to know before you go ahead and create that update?
So I usually ground the conversation in three things: scope, timelines, and control posture.
Yeah.
And I don't let the discussion drift until you directionally have answers to each one of them.
Yeah.
In terms of scope, I want to know what exactly is affected, what system was impacted, and what data types were involved. And most importantly, does any of that connect back to our customers? Early on, I'm not looking for any perfection. I'm just looking for boundaries.
Right.
I mentioned second is timelines. Here's where I want to know when the incident started, when was it detected, and when the containment began. That timeline drives everything, right? From your regulatory obligation, customer communication, and how much confidence you have in your current state. And finally, the control posture, not what's happened, but what's already been executed. Has credentials been rotated? Systems been isolated, and is monitoring in place right now? Then you try to notice what's not on your list, like root cause, blame, forensics. Those matter, just not on your first R. Early response is really about decision making under uncertainty, not perfect information. Yeah. So I've seen vendors had a very sophisticated remediation plan, but actually didn't even execute their first two containment steps. So until you know what's real versus what's aspirational, you can't really responsibly advise leadership. So in third-party incidences, clarity beats completeness every time, Hilary.
Yeah, I think that's such an important part because, in my experience, I've seen a lot of, internal teams. They want to come to the table looking like they're ready to go and ready to solve the problem. And, in that first hour or two, it's not about solving the problem, it's understanding what's happened. So I love how you said it's not about root cause or blame at that moment.
Yes.
What we need to act on, was our data impacted? And I think it's really about not worrying about a perfect update, but having the right information to make the next decisions confidently. Exactly. We know what we need to do next. So yeah, I would totally agree that sometimes we need to slow down and really get the lay of the land before we rush to, give an update that's incomplete or inaccurate, even worse, or may set the wrong expectation overall, right?
Yep.
So yeah, I totally agree with that. So, one of the things that I feel like is really important, when we're talking about these things, we're talking about them sort of reactively. What do we do when something's happened? But I think part of it is thinking about what could happen and before it happens. So, there's a lot of misconceptions that organizations carry about their vendor visibility, right? So, I think why don't you lean in and tell us a little bit about what those misconceptions are? Because I know there are quite a few.
Yeah, so, and there are so many, right? But the biggest misconception is that visibility into your third party works like visibility into your internal system, which it doesn't, right? And leadership often thinks if something goes wrong, we will know immediately. In practice, we only know when a vendor knows and when they're ready to communicate. I have seen leaders being surprised when we couldn't immediately answer your basic questions during a vendor incident. Not because our teams weren't prepared, it's just that the information literally didn't exist at that moment.
Right.
So people people assume that third-party visibility is continuous and immediate. It's in reality very delayed, filtered, and contractual. And your response plan has to be built around that specific truth. So the hard moment is if expectations haven't been reset in advance, that's when you usually end up in trouble. And quite honestly, you cannot control every incident, but you can control coordination.
Right. I think that's so important. And just to jump in, it is true that we can have great systems and we can have good records, but when that moment actually happens, when we get the notification, hopefully within our contractual terms, right? There is a misconception that we automatically can press a button and pull up all the data that we need to. I mean, we should have a lot, but we still are dependent on that vendor to provide the right information. And I think it's important for people to really anchor in on that it's not just about your contract, how it's set up, it's your planning, but it's also your relationship with them as well.
Yes.
So, we've talked about misconceptions. I also think there's a lot of blind spots that we have during these instances. I mean, I can think of several times where the team has been heading down a direction with the vendor and they haven't stopped to check to make sure that the vendor has their full recovery team on the phone.
Yeah.
And then the piece of information lands later. So what are some things that you've seen blind spots in these recovery or response scenarios?
You did cover a very good blind spot, but one which is very obvious to me that comes to my mind is underestimating indirect dependencies. So I've been in incidences where vendor technically wasn't breached, but their upstream provider was.
Oh.
And the primary vendor didn't consider it as their incident at first. So the notifications were delayed. So from our point of view, the surprise wasn't the vulnerability, which was the issue. It was about the assumption that the responsibility stopped at vendor boundary. That's when teams realized that the third-party incident response isn't just about vendors, it's about fourth parties and ecosystem visibility as well.
Yeah. So once those fourth parties are in the chat, we have another extended dependency. And so in that case, we're depending on our vendor to manage their vendor and collect that. So we're adding multiple layers. And yes, that can create chaos if we're not prepared for it. We don't know that those fourth parties exist, right?
Exactly.
So, we do, in most mature programs and most contracts, we're asking our vendors, especially if they're critical, to disclose who their material vendors are, so our fourth parties. And we assume that, we have this all locked in the contract. If something happens, we're going to get that breach notification. But I mean, really, the contract is the cause actually enough, right? So what's your experience?
Yeah, hopefully we'll get it. But breach notification clauses are important, but they are necessary, not sufficient. At best, they create a floor for any specific behavior. They establish your, as you know, timelines, notification thresholds, and even escalation rights. But in a real incident, clauses alone rarely guarantee you timely or useful action.
Yeah.
So most clauses are written, as you might already know, right? They're legally precise, but not operationally actionable. And they tend to hang on terms like material impact, confirm breach, which is exactly difficult to identify in your first 24 to 48 hours. So vendors technically can comply with that 24-hour notification clause, but provide information that is too high level to support any decision. So from a contract standpoint, they did meet their requirements, but from a response standpoint, the customers are still flying blind.
Yeah, so the contract clause that gets you the call, but it doesn't get you the coordination, right? So that is still the outstanding piece. So, we've talked about a few blind spots and things we need to know, and the pressure that comes with needing to update leadership. So, I guess my question, since you really do this every day, or hopefully not every day, but this is your responsibility every day, How are you going to balance, the speed and the need to share information with the verification of what's going on and not risk overreacting or underreacting?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I really try to separate speed from certainty, because waiting for certainty usually costs you speed. So early in your incident, the goal isn't, like I mentioned earlier, it isn't to get everything right. It's to be directionally correct about impact and your next steps. I always like to say, move fast with awareness and slow down with any conclusions. And in terms of information sharing, I think of it as a 3-tier approach. First one is really awareness, which is simple. You're basically saying we are aware and we are investigating. No conclusion or speculation, just awareness and ownership. Tier 2 is about your decision support. And this is where you share what's known, what's unknown, and what's being currently validated. So that allows leadership to make provisional decisions without overreacting.
Yeah.
And tier 3 is your confirmed impact, right? Only after verification do you escalate to definitive statements or customer notifications or regulatory filings. So label confidence very clearly is what I always say.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So, we've kind of covered all the things that can happen in those first couple hours, what we need to watch out for. I do feel like it's helpful to acknowledge that many organizations have different directional and organizational ways of handling business continuity and disaster recovery, right? So in some organizations, that internal ECVR team is part of enterprise risk. Yep. They're sort of managing and coordinating everything. In others, you might have a liaison to that team as part of your TPRM team. In smaller organizations, it may be all the TPRM team kind of partnering with, InfoSec or legal or compliance. So, in kind of a perfect world, understanding that things are organized differently, who should be leading that response conversation, right? That's the question.
Yeah, in my opinion, the most effective responses are led by a joint task force, but with a very clear ownership and boundaries.
Okay.
When it comes to vendor, they should lead technical remediations in their environment. And in an organization, basically leads risk decisions or customer impact or regulatory engagement. The problem is when either side tries to own everything, that's when responses slow down and trust erodes. I have been in incidences where vendor wanted to control all communication to avoid confusion.
Yes.
And on the flip side, I've seen incidences where a customer tries to micromanage remediation. Both approaches break down. And quite honestly, the sweet spot is shared situational awareness with your separate accountability. So basically, your joint model allows for faster validation of facts, aligned messaging, and real-time escalation without any finger pointing. So that's when you turn response from your negotiation into collaboration.
Yeah, I like that because it is a negotiation. Contracts and relationships, aside, in that moment, both parties are negotiating the next steps and like agreeing and moving forward. And if there's a lot of tension or friction or those boundaries aren't clear, we definitely are going to hit roadblocks. But I do want to talk a little bit more about friction. So, and this is more about the internal side. So we've agreed that the organization should be co-leading that response with the vendor. But let's talk about inside, because what I've seen more than once is where there's a lot of friction between the line of business, the legal, the info security team, and everybody's trying to assert their place. So, info security, what they want is different. Legal's like, hey, we got to be really careful about what we say right now. The business is like, hey, when can we go back to work? So, I mean, have you seen that in your experience? That tension inside?
All the time. And tension is real and it's normal, right? Because your security or infosec teams are optimized for speed and containment. Your legal is optimized for accuracy and exposure management, whereas your business team are focused on continuity and your customer impact. Those goals aren't wrong, they're just misaligned in time. Meaning your security wants to act fast, legal wants to slow down, and business wants answers immediately. Where things break down is when those groups meet for the very first time during an incident. So an organization that handles that expectations before anything happens, especially around what can be shared earlier, who approves external communication, what good looks like in the first 24 hours, they usually tend to operate well.
Yeah. So it's just like everything else we do in TPRM. It's really deciding, those boundaries, the individual roles and responsibilities of the participating folks, both internally and externally, and making sure that we're just not documenting that and hoping they see it during that moment, go, oh, okay, but that they agree to it, right? That they're familiar with it and are comfortable with their role, know what they need to provide or do, and what they don't need to do, and where they may need to make decisions. I think that is so important to really make sure that those tensions can be avoided if they're decided in advance, right?
Agreed.
So again, with different organizations, things work differently. So I know we always talk about technology and tools and platforms, and they're going to be different for everyone. But is there particular, tools or platforms that you think are best for that coordinated response? Anything you would add there?
Yeah, from my point of view, what matters more than a specific tool is what problem the tool is solving during an incident. So in a coordinated response, the team needs, think of it as 3 capabilities. A shared source of truth, which is like an incident management or a ticketing platform where both internal and vendors are working together at the same time. 2 is real-time communication. So your secure collaboration channels like Teams or Slack or any other, basically not an ad hoc email thread. And 3rd is the traceable decision making. A place to document decisions, assumptions, and update as they evolve. The biggest failure I've seen weren't because the teams lacked tool, but because the teams used different tools that didn't talk to one another. So security was basically tracking one version, legal another, vendor a third one. And at that point, coordination just breaks down no matter how good each individual tool is. So during an incident, I'll just make this one final point that I like. So during an incident, alignment matters more than automation.
Yes, I agree. And I want to piggyback on that to say that we should expect there's going to be different tools in the mix. And just as important as knowing, what the tools there to solve, it's like my TPRM platform should be housing, important vendor information. We should know in that tool what data they touch. We should know what the contract says. We should know if they've had any performance issues, when their last due diligence or, risk review took place, which that's all reasonable for us to have in our tools. But our BCDR team may have other things. What I think is really important, and you make this point so well, is it's not about the tool, it's about the coordination and knowing what data to bring to that response meeting to be able to provide quickly, and then having an official system of record recording the recovery and the resolution, right? So whether that's in third-party risk, whether that's your BCDR platform, we have to have one source of truth for that.
Exactly.
Right. So just talking about recovery, because we're kind of moving through what we've discussed already, we're at the point where we've got the information and we're seeing containment, we're seeing some resolution. We've, maybe it's a few hours, maybe it's a day or two where we can update leadership. How do we know, at what point do we think that recovery, we can say it's successful, right?
Yeah.
What's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's again a great question. And I try to avoid measuring recovery by activities and instead focus on the 3 C's, which is confidence, continuity, and control. For confidence, I try to ask, do people trust the environment again? Are leadership, security, and business comfortable operating without your constant exception handling? If executives stop asking for those daily updates, that's usually the sign confidence has returned. For continuity, I try to gauge, did the business actually stabilize and have critical services return to your normal performance levels without any workaround? And if the teams are still using compensating manual weeks later, recovery isn't complete, it's just slightly hidden. And from a control standpoint, I ask, are we stronger than before? Have we implemented durable control improvements, not just your incident-specific band-aid fixes? Because recovery should leave an organization in a better position than for the next one, right? I've seen recoveries look successful on paper, basically a system restored, tickets closed, but still failed because the leadership didn't trust the vendor relationship anymore. And that's not a technical failure, Hilary. That's a recovery failure. Because recovery is successful when risk conversations again return back to strategy and not your crisis.
Right. You know, when you talk about controls too, it also makes me think that even though maybe we very successfully recovered from an incident, part of that control environment, especially from a third-party risk perspective, is how we're providing oversight and monitoring on that vendor overall. You know, once we've had a chance to diagnose root cause, put the right controls in place, you know, whether they're preventative or detective, but, you know, it's up to third-party risk management to make sure that maybe we're doing more frequent oversight or we're asking for additional documentation for the next couple months. Or when we get to a potential contract renegotiation, that we really consider what we could add to that contract to further strengthen the control environment. Because it's not enough to go be like, ooh, we fixed it. Ooh, dodged a bullet. No, I mean, you really do have to take actions that preserve or strengthen that control environment moving forward. So, you know, this kind of brings me to my next thing, which is at the end of the day, we have to sit down and say, what did we learn from all of this? What can we do to strengthen or improve our resilience? And, you know, I'm sure you have thoughts about that, so I would love to hear them.
Yeah, basically your after action and post incident learning, right? And after action are where resiliency is actually built. So if recovery is about restoring your operations, learning is about preventing any repeat actions. So your goal of after action review isn't to document what went wrong, it's to understand why a decision was made at that time, where assumptions failed. If the review turns into a more of a finger pointing, people stop being honest. An organization stops learning.
Right.
And the most effective reviews focus on 3 main things, I like to say, is your decision points, not just timelines, information gap, and third is system frictions, not one-off failure.
Yes, that's a very good distinction for sure. I mean, there is also sort of the human element as you're coming down from these, like, you know, it's realistic to expect that people might be defensive or reactive. And I think when you really focus on the documentation and the gaps and you're not pointing fingers or playing the blame game, it actually does allow people to come forward with more meaningful information and more meaningful improvements, because, you know, we're not trying to say, well, this was your fault and it should never happen again. I think we're just going to say, where were the gaps? Where could we do better? And I think that's a very, very important distinction to make in sort of not just recovery on paper, but that trust recovery, that confidence recovery as well.
And I would like to also add that after actions should invariably lead into your updates to contract, adjust escalation thresholds,
yes,
playbook refresh, revisit vendor segmentations. If nothing changes, then review, did it really work? I mean, I always like to think of it from that standpoint, if after actions and recovery was successful.
Okay. So I do want to kind of lean into sort of our big takeaway for the listeners today. So if you were to recommend one practical action a third-party risk management team could take right now to improve their incident response, coordination, and sort of recovery readiness for vendor incidents, what would that be?
If there is one practical action that a TPRM could take right now, is pick your top 5 critical vendors. And when I say critical, I mean there are so many definitions to that term itself. But in a simplistic way, think of it as a vendor who, if it goes down, then your organization is basically brought down to its knees. We even quantified based on RTO, RPO as well, which is less than 24 hours. But pick your top 5 vendors and run a 1-hour incident scenario with each one of them. Not a formal audit, not a comprehensive review, just a simple walkthrough of realistic incidences. You can ask, who calls whom first? What information is available in your first hour? Where do decisions stall? And what assumptions would break down under pressure? You will learn more in that 1 hour than months of questionnaire. It'll sort of expose you to any escalation gaps, communication, authority, even recovery assumptions while the stakes are still low. The goal in this isn't to scare your vendor or your team. It's just to normalize collaboration before something really goes wrong. That single step, Hilary, can materially change how your next incident plays out.
Yeah, I agree. I was in a tabletop a couple of years ago where we had recently done our annual risk review. We refreshed due diligence. We came to the table with all the documentation. We sat down to do the tabletop, and our vendor rep, granted he was fairly new, but when we started walking through the contacts, who are we calling, what role do they play, he was not familiar with it because somebody else had sent over the due diligence packet. And it really was not a matter of putting him on the spot, but just to helping him understand that your phone will be ringing. So how do we get familiar with this? And in that situation, we also found out that they needed to update some key contacts in that information we had just recently refreshed. So I completely agree that tabletops can be some of the lowest stakes but highest return things that you can do with your vendors, and it really gives them a sense of what they would be responsible for, right? So I love that idea. I love that idea. I do want to just talk really quickly, because you did mention it, about critical vendors. So in general, critical vendors are those that have the highest operational impact should they fail. And that can come from a number of reasons. One, because it will trigger regulatory action, right? It will fundamentally shut down your operations, impact your customers, which is a really big thing. So when you're thinking about critical and you're like, well, who impacts my customers? Oh, it's our call center. Well, yes, that's true. But there may be somebody who's never talking to your customers, not directly interacting with them, like your vendor's cloud provider who runs the software or, that's doing their online banking. So I think it's really important to think about, yes, we want to prioritize our critical vendors. We want to think about the impacts that will happen to the organization if they or their vendors should fail, right? So yes, prioritizing those for your tabletops, I think is a great piece of advice.
And like you said, those are the ones that regulators really care about or pick really when you begin an examination, and necessary for your company, of course.
So we are coming to the end of our time together, and I want to thank you for being here. But is there any one last thought you want to leave our listeners with? Any, big piece of advice, wisdom?
No, I just enjoyed the conversation today. I hope I've given listeners a few takeaway you can apply the next time a third-party incident does land on your desk. and really enjoyed our conversation today.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us also. Make sure you tune into our next episode where we will be talking about program maturity and improvement. So thanks for listening. Catch you next time.
Do you have a third-party risk management question or topic idea for an upcoming episode? Send your questions to pod@tprassociation.org. The Third Party Risk Association is the only not-for-profit vendor and framework-agnostic professional association for third-party risk management professionals, bringing together thousands of practitioners and leaders worldwide. TPRA offers tools, templates, training, certifications, networking, and shared industry practices designed to support both your program and your professional development. Practitioner membership is free. To join, visit tprassociation.org and select Join under Membership.